He's saying they run better plays here. Have we even seen close to the real George Pickens, what he can be when you're playing with the Matt Canada and the Arthur Smith offense with the quarterbacks the Steelers have had? Have we seen anything close to what he could be? I don't think so. What Dak Prescott's going to throw the ball 620, 650 times. That might be conservative, right? So he's saying 120, 130 targets for George Pickens? I mean, we're talking about potentially like 90, 1,400, and 8. That's a wide receiver one. What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Talking early training camp winners for Fantasy Football 2025. School of Scott podcast, Theo Gremminger with Scott Barrett. Joined today by our friend Sigmund Bloom of Football Guys. Sigmund, before we get started, I saw an interesting tweet from you, and I'm sort of feeling this one. Is the Kansas City Chiefs passing game back this year? What are your vibes with Patrick Mahomes and the pass catchers in Kansas City?
Well, here's why I have some optimism. They've got more firewall durability now. It sounds like Jalen Royals, they're saying the right things for him to actually be onboarded in time to participate in a Andy Reid offense as a rookie. They're saying he's not making the same mistakes twice. And he's a player, honestly, that maybe should have gone higher in the draft and has some skill sets that overlap with someone like, say, Luther Burden or Jalen Noel. So don't underestimate him. So that gives them some of the injury resiliency that they did not have last year. You've got Xavier Worthy, who was really coming on at the end of the year. Roshy Rice, we'll see what the suspension brings. But Marquise Brown now can be a role player, not a key player that they're relying on. And Brashard Smith is getting a lot of work with wide receivers. And then the other key part here is Josh Simmons, who's already practicing. They might have got the best offensive tackle in the draft coming off of patellar tendon tear at pick 31. So that could be really huge to give, because the last time we saw Patrick Mahomes, he was just getting pummeled, and Josh Simmons might change that. So this might be the year to buy in.
And Scott, you're continually dropping like awesome tweets over on X, but I pulled up your one from last year because I remember specifically talking about this with you, and this is last October where you tweeted out that Patrick Mahomes has failed to hit 21 fantasy points in 13 straight games. So we've talked about this, the lack of upside with Patrick Mahomes, and sort of the last couple of years, it's been just sort of disappointments at ADP. Now he's sort of in a range of the draft where you're not having to consider him alongside those incredibly high rushing upside quarterbacks. Could there be an edge to Patrick Mahomes potentially this year, or are you still not really necessarily buying into it?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely a really good chance when it's Patrick Mahomes, who we're all kind of unanimously like, this is the best quarterback of the post-Brady generation. This is the best quarterback in football. All of his receivers were hurt. So yeah, obviously he could have this resurgence. It just feels priced into me when he's QB6 and he's finished QB 13, QB 14 the last 2 years. So, I'm going to want to gamble on a Konami code quarterback. I also think just, this defense is really good and they're getting, better running backs than they had last year. I think they're content to win the way they've been winning, which is, slower paced, pound the rock. Defense is playing really well. A stat I had last year that I think really, hits home on this point is Patrick Mahomes ranked either first or second in passing yards per game in the first half. You could look this up on Fantasy Points data. You could use our free basic passing tool. First or second in passing yards per game in the first half. And then the second half, it was, 38th. And so it's just like, yeah, hey, what if the defense sucks this year? I don't think it will. But I think when you have potentially the best quarterback in football, he can kind of do what he wants to do.
Quick follow-up, Sig, not on the show sheet. What are your vibes with Xavier Worthy? It's been a lot of podcasts I've been on where I'm sort of in the pro-Worthy department, and some very smart people have always sort of been slightly fading him. I think it's very mixed in fantasy football right now. People are either very much in on Xavier Worthy or can oftentimes be very much out. Sort of had a lifeline with the potential Roshy Rice suspension. But do your vibes with Mahomes in this passing game also include drafting a good amount of Xavier Worthy this year?
Maybe not a good amount, just because I'm not going to take him ahead of, say, Devontae Smith, who's generally going later than him. There's another topic there, but I think that the football gods might have been winking at us after we were watching the Eagles celebrating on the sidelines, but Xavier Worthy was finally getting open deep, free from coverage, and Patrick Mahomes finding him with the deep ball, which has been such a problem that maybe that is. And look, I think one of the things people don't understand sometimes is it only takes like 4 or 5 of those to connect to make Worthy a big hit. Once every 3 weeks, if in that first half when Patrick Mahomes is slinging it, they dial up one of those balls, and once every 3 weeks it connects, now Xavier Worthy is a borderline wide receiver 1.
Yeah, he's definitely a fun one to watch, and I think like when we talk about range of outcomes type players, he's definitely one of them this season, especially with how he'll produce when Rashee Rice is actually on the field. Scott, I'll pump to you for this one. We have been hearing a lot early in camp about Braelon Allen, a lot especially from the Jets beat reporters about just how good Allen looks. There's been a lot of positives of him ripping off big runs. There's been some video of him catching a couple of passes. 21 years old, played last year at 20. Could this be a Braelon Allen is super valuable in sort of the David Montgomery role in the Tanner Engstrand offense? Are you buying into this? What potential effect could it have on Breece Hall if Allen's able to carve out a big role as a runner?
You asked the wrong person, Theo, because this is a question that Ryan and I have been agonizing over for weeks and weeks and weeks. In terms of Braelon Allen's value, I'm not super excited about it outside of best ball leagues. In a start-sit league where you're really trying to chase that upside does he have it with Fields there, potentially vulturing touchdowns, and then Breece getting all the passing down work and whatnot. So the real question, what Ryan and I are agonizing over, is Breece Hall. And I see tremendous upside, just like you're not getting a running back with his pass catching ability this late in drafts. A stat I had was the only running backs to hit 200 plus carries and 75 plus targets in back-to-back seasons since 2008. It's all my favorite running backs: LaDainian Tomlinson, Ray Rice, Matt Forte, Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, Austin Eckler, CMC, and then Breece Hall on an active streak. Ryan's been saying is like, here's a thought experiment. Imagine a world where Coach Speak Index didn't exist. Where would Breece Hall be going? Round 2? The problem is, every chance these coaches can get, they're hyping up every running back who's not Breece Hall. They're talking about a 3-way committee backfield. Braelon Allen looked pretty terrible to me last year. So I'm kind of like, I want to bet on it just being Breece, but like even the beat writers are saying Braelon Allen looks awesome. Breece Hall had 2 practices ago a fumble and a few drops, and I don't know. It seems like there's real buzz. So Breece Hall is really a guy I could have been way over the field on. And I think right now I'm coming in around industry consensus, which is, maybe a little disappointing to me.
I'll just say devil's advocate to you, Scott, is the Braelon Allen. I understand there's a lot of the analytics takes are last year just was not hitting in certain metrics, but 20 years old. So like the learning curve, we never know, like if it was a college running back who was 20, I think maybe we'd give them a little bit more wiggle room that, hey, they could take that next step because it's the NFL and everything's sort of so scrutinized. I think Allen took a lot of heat last year, especially when he delivered so early on in the year. I'll follow up with Scott's Breece Hall take. Sig, pretty much all offseason, you've been really enthusiastic about this Tanner Engstrand offense. Just everything about New York you've really been enthusiastic about and taken a really optimistic approach. If Braelon Allen is a thing, just how much of an effect could that have on Breece Hall? Because I understand what Scott's saying, but I don't think Braelon Allen's going to be a guy that we'd expect to catch a lot of passes. I'm so a little bit torn here with how to value Breece Hall if Braelon Allen's role does expand like they're reporting.
Look, I understand, and there's some percentage chance that we were taking Breece Hall in the top 5 last year. When I say we, I mean the fantasy football community. I wasn't. And then for a player like that, you could apply this to Tyreek Hill too. For a player like that to fall to the 3rd round, like are we overreacting? And I think the answer is no. At some point, you have to just believe the coaches are telling us what they actually. I mean, you have to make a conspiracy theory, or you have to say Breece Hall is so good that they're just going to tear up their plans once they see him play, and that didn't happen last year. Now, I do think you're right to bring up that how much was offensive ineptitude holding back the players in this offense, but Justin Fields, Tyrod Taylor is at least competent. Do we expect you could take a step forward from terrible to merely disappointing or sub-mediocre, but you're not going to take a step forward from terrible to efficient. Okay. So I just think that you can put a chip down on Breece Hall and say he's so talented that if I can get a player like that in the third round, I'll just let the chips fall where they may. But you're going against everything we're seeing, even Breece Hall. For me, another thing to add to this, not just coach speak, Theo, but player speak. Breece Hall saying, like, no, they're not going to give me an extension. Breece Hall on draft, going up to the draft with his, what was it, like his prey or something like that? Like everyone speculating, oh, does he expect to get traded? Is he hoping to get traded? There's enough out there that Breece Hall is going to have to prove and earn everything he gets. And this organization, this GM, this coach is not wedded to him. It's not their guy. They're telling us that. So you're going against a lot of evidence to the contrary if you say, like, no, Breece Hall is going to just transform everyone's mind by how good he is.
Yeah, very, very interesting stuff. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about this Jets offense, especially the running back situation, over the next month. Scott, you've got your big article coming up pretty soon.
We're shooting for August 6th. That's what we're shooting for. I'm hoping rankings are going to be out early. Everyone's asked for this. There's going to be a place on the site for my rankings with the overall rankings. But I think, so you're bringing up a great question right now where you're asking about the insane vibes on Jameson Williams. And we've seen this before. They're on a whole nother level this year. They're really insane. Multiple players on the team, former players on the team are all talking about him getting potentially more yards than Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so earlier on in this season, the off season, you and I were talking about, drooling about the Ben Johnson slot role. But the reverse of that thinking is maybe this is bad for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, we know is an amazing player, really talented, but he's also, under-heralded, famously 16 wide receivers went above him in the draft. And Ben Johnson saying the slot is the focal point of my offense, where maybe it's not for the new offensive coordinator. And what are you hearing from the new offensive coordinator? You're hearing, hey, we're going to get the new focal point is Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta. We want more explosives in the passing game, more explosives in the running game. And I really think this can kind of open things up for everyone. From what I've heard is it's the exact same playbook, and people are overstating Ben Johnson's impact and understating Dan Campbell's impact. People think like Ben Johnson got there, the Lions immediately became this top 3 offense. It was actually when Dan Campbell took over for Anthony Lynn in the second half of that year. Jared Goff's passer rating spiked incredibly, and it's been like exactly the same with Ben Johnson. And Dan Campbell's been calling some of the plays. Like he was asked about this, and he was like, I called some of these plays as well. I have a lot of input in this. And so like everyone thinks that the Lions are going to take a big step back. I was talking to Brett about this. I think there's actually a chance they could be better. Like I would not bet on that, but it's like there's a real chance, because what this new offensive play caller is talking about is like we left a lot of plays on the table. We could do bigger, better things, focusing more on our explosive players in the passing game. And Brett was at camp. He was at Lions camp. He has great connections there, and he was telling me, he was like, yeah, I think you nailed it. As I'm seeing Jahmyr Gibbs split out wide in the slot. I'm seeing him roast nickel cornerbacks. I'm seeing Jameson Williams lined up everywhere. He had more snaps in the slot than Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this isn't priced in, but like I think I'm going to be pretty under the field on Amon-Ra St. Brown and a little bit over the field on Jameson Williams. Again, all reports out are like, he looks like a completely different player. He's a breakout waiting to happen. He's being lined up everywhere. His, route running has taken another level. understands the offense like the back of his hand, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you think? What does Sig think?
I want to be optimistic. A couple of things I'm going to be watching are an interesting item from Khalif Raymond talking about new wide receiver coach Scotty Montgomery. Antoine Randall is kind of the right-hand man for Ben Johnson now in Chicago, saying that where Ben Johnson was so detail-oriented, like everything was about landmarks, exactness, precision. Scotty Montgomery's more like, hey, do you? And I can't remember who it was that pointed out. I wish I did. It's like, is that good for Jared Goff? Is that really something that you think about Jared Goff as a guy like, let's scat and improvise and react to things in the moment? The other thing I'm going to be watching, maybe more material, is the interior offensive line. They did have Frank Ragnow retire. Kevin Zeitler is down in Tennessee now. Now, as long as everyone stays healthy, it sounds like Graham Glasgow is going to be a fine center. They have Christian Mahogany from last year, 6th-round pick, who was fantastic at the end of the year in a small amount of snaps. And then they drafted Tate Ratledge, who may end up being the center eventually, but it sounds like we'll line up guard. But if those guys are all fine, then I don't think we have to really pause or have much to worry about. So, let's say cautiously optimistic, but I think Scott's got it exactly right that Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're going to have to see him staring at you maybe in the early second round. I mean, I don't know if I would take him even over, say, A.J. Brown or Garrett Wilson at this point. Whereas Jameson Williams, you might be looking at, we talked about Xavier Worthy or Breece Hall. Like if someone says, man, Breece Hall, I'm going to take Jameson Williams at that spot. I'd say, okay, I'm not going to talk you out of that. Same with Sam Laporta, might be a little underrated. He came on after week 12. Jahmyr Gibbs, if someone says I'm taking him as running back 1, that could absolutely look wise in hindsight. I think we have to take John Morton on his word that he's being transparent, and that's what they're going to go for, and that's the plan, which is not great for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that even last year with Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had 22 fewer targets than 2023 and nearly 300 fewer receiving yards. He did have 12 receiving scores, and overall wide receiver scoring was down last year. So he still averaged 18.5 points per game, and he was still awesome. But I agree. And my Jameson Williams bags are packed. I've talked about it on this show. I've talked about it on Fantasy Football Daily. I did 2 FFPC main events. Jameson Williams in both of those. Now I think a month from now, Jameson Williams is going to rise at least a full round. All in on Jameson Williams this year. Really, really high on him. And he could be a player that just really takes his game to another level. Also, just follow up, Scott. When we talk about Jameson Williams last year, you're talking about a sub 100 target player. Go back to your evaluation process of Jameson Williams, because I think a lot of people will point this out as he's a capped target ceiling guy. Why can't he have 120 targets this year?
Yeah, well, that's part of the reasoning is so coming out of college, he was like, okay, maybe he's a little bit one-dimensional, exceptional deep threat, has a long way to go with everything else, but it's a number of years in the league now, and it was really last year you were looking at signs of the breakout because his ass in the short to intermediate was really good. And the deep ass was still phenomenal as it's always been. But here's to my point, here's one of the craziest stats I've found. And it's all players last year by yards per target on throws short and intermediate. So 1 to 15 yards in the air, right? Yards per target, all players from that range. Number 1, Jahmyr Gibbs. Crazy to see a running back that high. Crazy to see a running back. Number 2, Jameson Williams. Crazy. 2 players in the same offense. 3, it's like George Kittle. 4, it's like Puka Nacua. 5, it's all the players you think. And then all the way down at 60 is Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so it's why not get this absolute freak of nature? By the way, I think it's funny. John Morton, who doesn't look like it at all, ran a 4.39 at the combine in the early.
Stop it. John Morton did?
The 1990s. Yeah, dude. And he was asked about that. He's like, bro, Jameson is not no one moves like J-Mo moves. Certainly not me. Even though I was the fastest player at his combine. And so it's just why wouldn't you give him more screens and more short area stuff or Jahmyr Gibbs? And it seems like Brad at practice, that is kind of what they're trying to do.
Insert the Shaquille O'Neal meme right now. Apologies to John Morton. I was not familiar with your game in the 40. Sig, let's talk about another wide receiver, another young wide receiver, and one you know very, very well. The early vibes for George Pickens are terrific, not only with his on-the-field production, but there's been a locker room bond formed with CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
CeeDee Lamb, I mean, it sounds like he's talking about his best friend, saying really, really nice things about George Pickens. There's been no off-the-field anything. It seems like there's an entire organization fully betting on George Pickens, the person, in addition to George Pickens, the player. And the locker room vibes are strong, and the on-the-field vibes are really strong. Just how good can George Pickens be in this offense? Let's give him a 20% target share. Let's stay realistic here. How good can he be playing second fiddle to a CeeDee Lamb? Is he a player that can affect fantasy leagues this year?
Oh my gosh, 20% target share?
Give it.
I mean, what Dak Prescott's going to throw the ball 620, 650 times. That might be conservative, right? So he's saying 120, 130 targets for George Pickens. I mean, we're talking about potentially like 90, 1,400, and 8. That's a wide receiver one, So, yeah. And the other thing that's interesting to watch here, as you were hinting at, George Pickens seems relaxed now. He seems like himself. It's not the first time in this show I'm going to talk about this, but he's saying they run better plays here. How have we even seen close to the real George Pickens? What he can be when you're playing with Matt Canada and Arthur Smith offense with the quarterbacks the Steelers have had? Have we seen anything close to what he could be? I don't think so. So George Pickens there in the 5th round? Sure. Sign me up for that. I mean, this is going to be fun. He's talking about also George Pickens is a very underrated player after the catch. He's talking about getting to run dig routes and just making hints at in Pittsburgh. They're like, no, you don't run dig routes. So he's excited and he's relaxed and he feels like he's accepted both as a person and as a football player. So these are the kinds of things that when and if he does post a career year, how could we have seen it coming? This is how.
Scott, your thoughts on Pickens right now?
Yeah, I like it. And I think what Sig brings up is an important point because I was saying earlier in the offseason, like I'm worried about him potentially pulling a Deontay, right? Like in terms of like atrocious vibes, off-field antics, on-field antics, skipping practices, showing up late to games, different things like that. Really bad for George Pickens. But yeah, like you're saying, is like George Pickens looks to be, vibes are good. The coach is praising him like crazy. There was a great quote from Schottenheimer a couple of days ago where he was like, yeah, he's a freak. This is one of the best deep ball tracking receivers I've ever seen. This is, but we want to get him involved over the middle too. We want him to be interchangeable with CeeDee Lamb. And like you look at the numbers on Pickens, you do see that. You do see an elite deep threat. But you also see a receiver who's dealt with like bottom 5 levels of quarterback play and quarterback accuracy all throughout his career. Dak Prescott, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in football these last 3-5 years. And CeeDee Lamb's, elite target earner, but like there's really not a lot else. So there's plenty of balls to go around. There's enough certainly to make George Pickens sort of like T. Higgins light. It's kind of like the same offense in my eyes.
Yeah, that's a really great way of looking at it. The T. Higgins light, I love that one. And then I'll give Scott some props here because we've talked about Jake Ferguson on this show actually for a couple of years now. We've randomly talked Jake Ferguson. You've always been higher on him than I have. I got to give you props, Scott. He just got the extension, so Jake Ferguson's got to move up in the dynasty rankings. Sig, your thoughts on Ferguson, who's now the number 3 option in this passing game, but in a really like kind of easy to click range, especially in best ball. Any vibes with Ferguson?
Yeah, I've rehabilitated him in my rankings. I still don't have him ahead of Tucker Kraft and Isaiah Likely. Spoiler alert. But he's out court. I would take him ahead of Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. So let's draw the picture here with George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson's going to be the forgotten guy, and especially in the red zone, I think you're going to see him get looks. He's banged up a lot last year. The other thing I'll just add to this is it sounds like if Ferguson is also banged up, as much as I like Luke Schoonmaker, who's actually healthy and having a pretty good summer, it sounds like Brevin Spanford, undrafted free agent from last year out of Minnesota, who they really like, is coming on even more. So that might be a guy, tight end premium dynasty leagues. Tuck that name away because he's a player who is really impressing them. And again, this is going to be one of those offenses. You just come back to the George Pickens talk really quick. Go back to 2023, whenever Dak Prescott was producing really well as a passer, and look at what Brandon Cooks was able to do. And then look at Brandon Cooks last year. So we can see that Brandon Cooks is on that September, October, November slope part of his career. Now put George Pickens into that role, who's in the spring of his career and still coming on. So you should be excited about. I think this is. We heard that news yesterday about Tyler Guyton potentially getting off an ACL. That was like a gut punch. But it sounds like actually he can be ready early in the season. So as long as the offensive line stays intact, I think with Brian Schottenheimer, this is going to be a player's team. This is going to be a team where they're not going to be restricted by Mike McCarthy and his lack of imagination. So I think this is an offense that could really surprise us as far as fantasy, not just efficiency, but accumulation.
We talked about Scott's big article coming out. Sig, you've also got your big article coming out over at Football Guys. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a draft day game plan. It really lays out just possibilities. I think that you always have to be flexible. And the most important thing going into your draft is to understand the different pockets, tiers, and the players you like, so that depending on how the draft unfolds, what positions you go with early, you'll know which players are going to be targeting later on. We were talking about it before the show. I say it's kind of like not you have to get off at this subway stop. It's if you get off at this subway stop, here are some good restaurants that you could eat at, and understanding how to mix and match. And maybe a few players I will say like Wright and Penn, obviously your late round game. So it's just something to massage your brain, get everything ready so that when the draft starts, it will come to you and you won't panic. If anything, by seeing how calm you are, you make some other people panic.
Yeah, make sure you check out all of Sig's work. Make sure you listen to On the Couch. Make sure you listen to The Audible. I always give you props for this one, Sig. A lot of my podcasting style, you've been a big influence on me throughout the years. So big props to you for everything you do. Let's talk about an ugly backfield, though. We talked about Dallas's offense, Detroit's offense. We're all hyped. Do we want any single Jacksonville Jaguar running back? The latest camp hype has been Tank Bigsby, a running back who didn't catch any passes last year, but did have 7 rushing scores and was efficient as a runner, averaged about 4.5 yards per carry. Looks like the lead back right now. Start with you on this one, Sig. In on a specific Jaguar. I know we talked Bashal Tutin earlier in the offseason.
Yeah.
Influenced by early camp buzz?
You have to be. I mean, also, you have to be influenced by watching Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne last year, and Bigsby just looks like a better runner between the tackles. He's neither of these guys. No, there's not a Bucky Irving here. This offensive line isn't the Bucs' offensive line. Trevor Lawrence isn't Baker Mayfield yet. We'll see. But I want to be optimistic about the Jags. This might be an offense like, let's check in mid-season. Let's check in maybe even next year. But Liam Cohen is going to, I think, give them schematic and play design advantages that they didn't get, certainly not under Urban Meyer. And it felt like it was a pretty horizontal pass offense. It felt like Trevor Lawrence. I think this is a fun metaphor. We talk a lot about Travis Hunter and his potential transformative effect on the field, but Travis Hunter was also talking about how they're hanging out. He's trying to teach him dance moves and things like that. Just trying to get him to loosen up. Travis Hunter has a big personality and a beautiful personality, and that can also be a metaphor for how Trevor Lawrence can grow as a quarterback. Now, we might not see results right away, but when Tank Bigsby's going in the 12th, 13th round, if he's the goal line back, and this is an offense that is knocking on the door of the goal line more often, then there's some value to be had there. But I think you're going to see Travis Etienne. There's one potential twist here. Travis Etienne's due about $6 million. None of it. It is $6 million guaranteed as a 5th-year option. If there's some way they could deal him, that could become fascinating. It's Dallas, we've already talked about. There could be a twist here, as we heard the rumors that this team didn't really like what Travis Etienne has to offer. Liam Cohen dispelled those pretty, conclusively. There's nothing to analyze there. But oftentimes, things that we think, okay, we can turn the page on that. When we get to final cutdowns and some of the different roster moves that happen, we come back and we say, oh, we shouldn't have turned the page on that.
Scott, you're feeling on this backfield. I know you're a noted hater of this sort of potential ugly split backfield. We drafted a team. Oh my God, this must have been May. Abib Agbatoba, you and I drafted a team in FFPC, and at the time we drafted Travis Etienne, you weren't a big fan of the pick just because of, I think, this sort of fear occurring in the Jacksonville backfield. Talk about it. Are you interested in any of these players? Is this turning into a backfield to avoid? And any nervous trepidation type feelings when it comes to Bashal Tutin, a player the two of us were very high on throughout the draft process?
Yeah, this is different than best ball. Like maybe there's value to a Tank Bigsby in best ball, but from a start sit perspective, generally if I'm going to be gambling on a potential 3-headed backfield, I'm going to gamble on the cheapest option. But in this case, I actually really like the cheap option, which is Bashal Tutin. I see a lot of upside for him. Maybe he could be Liam Cohen's new Bucky Irving. It was a prospect I was really high on. And I love that he was already very cheap. But he's even cheaper now because people are panicking over the fact that he doesn't seem to have a role right now. He's the RB3. Bigsby is the early down workhorse. Etienne is the scat back 2-minute guy. But I love that. I thought it was so funny. You saw it's over for Bashal Tutin, one of the worst picks you could have made, laughing at people who were drafting him. And the same exact day, Sig put out a tweet that was Travion Henderson was working as a third string back, and Sig was just yep, this is what happens for rookies. Best ball has turned people into day traders where they're losing their minds over the tiniest thing. It's July. Doesn't mean this is what happens with rookies is generally you're the third string this early in camp. It's only news if you're the first string this early. So I still really like Bashal Tutin. I still see a lot of upside. Not really into Etienne, who I think is cooked, and not really into Tank Bigsby, who I don't think is as talented as Bashal Tutin.
You could just make an argument, guys, that Tutin is a backup to both of these players, and there's a chance he'll just overtake one because Etienne has been inefficient as a runner. Tutin's a better runner than Etienne, and Tutin is by far a better pass catcher and a better pass catching option than Tank Bigsby. So maybe it's two specialists early on, and then they move to the most well-rounded back in this offense. And like Sig said, maybe week 5 on, you get your Bashal Tutin then. Scott, I love the parallels between the best ball and the stock market. It's just there's constant money moving. Underdog puts a draft in, and it's filled in 3 days now. So best ball is really influencing the ADP market for sure. A player that could turn out to be a huge best ball bargain is Anthony Richardson. A lot of people were writing him off with Daniel Jones. Sig, you've talked about Richardson. I've seen you tweeting him recently, but there's been a lot of positive reports out the opening week of training camp. The beats are saying it looks like it's Anthony Richardson, and his play has been strong. That's also coinciding with the emergence of Tyler Warren. The Colts obviously took Tyler Warren very early in the first round. Could this be a symbiotic relationship that sort of opens things up for Anthony Richardson, still only 23 years old, to rewrite the narrative a little bit this year for him as a quarterback? And at the same time, can Tyler Warren be the most valuable Colt to draft this year?
I think Colts want that to happen. So unpacking these, Anthony Richardson at this point, like you said, we could go back to the offseason whenever Richardson's shoulder issue was reported, and we thought, well, that's it. It's over for Richardson. If it's a quarterback competition and his shoulder's not right, how's he going to win? And then he shows up to camp, no restrictions. Okay, now our mind is open to something else. And then, honestly, it just sounds like the Colts saw who Daniel Jones is up close. And I think that's probably why a lot of the beat writers are like, yeah, Anthony Richardson's probably going to win, in so much as you can't say that Daniel Jones has beaten anybody out. And Anthony Richardson actually in the short and intermediate game is looking more accurate. That was the focus of his work in the offseason. And then you just hear Tyler Warren. And I'm really torn about Tyler Warren because I was a little bit underwhelmed. I don't think that he's the kind of player, if you watch him and you think about how he would translate. Penn State also made him a focal point of the offense. I don't think that he's in that George Kittle Tucker Kraft, Rob Gronkowski, like just an absolute marauder going through the defense. He's not the route runner that Colston Loveland is. He's not the natural receiver that Colston Loveland is. I don't think he's quite the just berserker that Taysom Hill is as a short yardage runner. Plus, if Anthony Richardson's the quarterback and Jonathan Taylor, you really think Tyler Warren's your best short yardage option? But the Colts, they're really into this. And Shane Steichen was talking in the offseason months before the draft, basically, without spelling it out, like, I hope we get to take Tyler Warren. And they got him. So sometimes, even if a player isn't up to what a team thinks he can do, it's tight end. The margins are small. If they try to make him the focal point of the offense as a rookie, he could underperform, be inefficient, and still hit at ADP. Maybe not a top 3, top 5 tight end, but absolutely, I think that we have to be open to when a team wants to force it to a player. When it's a tight end, it doesn't take much. So I'm saying a lot of words to say, take Anthony Richardson late. This is exactly the kind of upside play. If he's staring at you in the 13th, 14th, that's exactly the kind of player. Why? Because if he hits, jackpot, and if he doesn't, you move on in a week or two. If he looks like good old Anthony Richardson can't hit the broadside of a barn, that's actually a good thing in those first few waiver wire runs. You want to take players from round 12 or 13 on that within a week or two whether you hit or whether it's time to get a flavor of the week on the waiver wire. For Tyler Warren, again, I like Tucker Kraft, I like Isaiah Likely, but if someone says I like Colston Loveland, if someone says Tyler Warren, I'm not going to talk him out of that. There's a lot of potential hits at tight end after tight end 8 or so.
Yeah, and we talked about Tyler Warren, Scott, when we had Brett Whitefield on School of Scott recently, but I'm specifically going to ask you about Anthony Richardson's impact on a player you've been really, really bullish on all offseason, Josh Downs. Is the Richardson vibe sort of, do they affect your enthusiasm with drafting Josh Downs? Are you still very much in on him? Sort of your early vibes with this Indianapolis offense.
Yeah, I'm certainly rooting for Daniel Jones. I think this is an underrated offense if you can get competent quarterback play. Steichen's offense in each of the last 2 years led in situation neutral pace of play. Steichen had a really good quarterback resume prior to Anthony Richardson. Richardson just had the worst completion percentage, worst completions per game of any quarterback since Tim Tebow. You look at Josh Downs last year in Flacco starts, he was top 3 in targets per route run and catchable targets per game. With Anthony Richardson, he was outside of the top 45 wide receivers. So it's just a really talented player, and it's like not a good fit for Anthony Richardson, who can throw it really far, but is not accurate in the short area of the field. Least accurate quarterback by orders of magnitude when targeting receivers on horizontal routes, which is how Downs wins. And yeah, so I just, you could bet on Anthony Richardson for fantasy. And that's one thing because he runs. But certainly I think you get Richardson in there, I think it kind of hurts all these pass catchers. And part of the problem now is there's a lot of pass catchers to like. There's like 4 great wide receivers. Alec Pierce, an elite deep threat. Josh Downs, like one of the better slots there are. Pittman, who has, pre-back injury last year, had a great resume. Adonai Mitchell, the ascot, and then Tyler Warren, a top 10 tight end pick. So I'm rooting for Daniel Jones. And I think it is going to be Daniel Jones, but it is interesting that the past week in camp, it seems like Anthony Richardson had a resurgence, might even be outplaying Daniel Jones over this last week.
Sig, a quick follow-up. I saw you took Jonathan Taylor in the Pros versus Joes FFPC draft. I'm in mine tonight, so we talked a little strategy before the show, but you took Jonathan Taylor late second round. Was that a structural pick for you, or was it more of I really like Jonathan Taylor end of the second round?
A little bit of both. Structural in the sense that after starting with Brock Bowers, I wanted to get running back. Those are the 2 toughest positions to get points at in FFPC contests. And then I just think it was choosing between him and Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown. I just think he's got the highest demonstrated ceiling. I also thought Chase Brown was, honestly, Chase Brown I thought was going to be there at the turn at 3-2. And if I had known, anyway, I'm just getting into my own regrets now, turning this into On the Couch episode. But we saw the last month of the season when everything was in shambles, and RIP Jim Irsay, by the way, that Jonathan Taylor was the guy that we were drafting number 1 overall 2 years ago. He was that guy again once he was past those ankle issues. It sounds like everything's going well with their offensive line in the wake of losing their center and a guard to Minnesota. And I just think that they want him to be basically like Derrick Henry, catching a few more passes. The offense isn't as efficient, but he's still at the peak of his career, and he can give us another peak year.
So Scott and I we've been kind of, discussing this off camera, trying to find the skeleton key offense. And it's not always that, high profile offense. A lot of times the offense that's been the most advantageous to drafters has been an offense that people are sort of pushing to the side and there's a lack of enthusiasm with. 2023 Houston Texans, that was a huge one. CJ Stroud going undrafted. You had Nico Collins, a massive winner. Tank Dell, a massive winner. Last year, the 2024 Bucks, Chris Godwin looked like the league winner. Bucky Irving, one of the best values at running back. Baker Mayfield, one of the best values at quarterback. And of course, Mike Evans down the stretch was just fantastic. Who's an underrated offensive unit that could end up producing multiple ADP wins this year?
I think it's Carolina. And we got to have optimism about this team because we saw from the bye on what Bryce Young can do. Dave Canales, I think, is a good coach tied to that Bucs team, of course. And now you have these wide receivers. They have some stability on the offensive line, too, but you have these wide receivers with Tet McMillan, Jalen Coker, Xavier Legette, Adam Thielen, even Jatavian Sanders. So you have some targets now. I think that you could have at least 2 of them hit at ADP. Yeah, Bryce Young hit at ADP pretty easily. He was borderline low quarterback 1 in his solid stretch last year and can get even better. Remember, Tedero McMillan. And then the real cherry on top here is Chuba Hubbard because he was a low running back 1, high running back 2 last year through all the turmoil in this offense. There's nothing that indicates that they see him as anything but their clear lead back. And he's available in the late 4th, early 5th round of your draft. So at that rising tide, I think you could see Chuba Hubbard move well into the running back 1 range. And I think that as you listen to Theo, as you listen to Scott, what it should set up is in every round, there should be 2 or 3 guys you're excited to take. It should be difficult to decide between the guys you're excited to take. That's how you know you're ready for your draft.
Yeah, Tet McMillan, I'm extremely, extremely high on. I think that Tet McMillan's the guy that sort of opens things up. And Scott, we've been talking about Tet McMillan now for so many months, and now it's finally here. Everything that Brett Whitefield, the 2 of us discussed during the draft process with his ability to be a mega target earner, it seems like the beat reporters are reporting that as well. Last year, besides Adam Thielen at the end of the year, it was really an offense that lacked, and Deontay Johnson at the very beginning of the year, it was an offense that lacked alpha type wide receiver 1 usage. It seems like Tet's going to be that right out the gate. Wide receiver 22 in ADP right now.
Yeah, great value for sure. Target. I think an underrated, under the radar option in this offense. I was just thinking about it. I was 5 minutes late to this. To our podcast today because I got stuck behind a train. And when I was stuck behind the train, I was thinking about Chase Brown from last year. And I know I got lucky with the Zach Moss injury, but part of my reasoning was just he's clearly so much better of a pass catcher than Zach Moss. So it's if he can just, be more efficient on the ground, he could just be a full on bell cow. And it's kind of like Rico Dowdle to me, where I like Chuba Hubbard. I want to bet on Chuba Hubbard. But Hubbard last year just had the worst yards per target season of any player in NFL history since targets became a stat in 1992. And we know Dave Canales, the running back, needs to be versatile, needs to be able to do it in both phases of the game. And so it's what if it's Chuba out of the gates, 18 carries, but Dowdle on his 5 carries is more efficient. And then you see that for a month and then maybe he just takes the whole thing over. So wasn't the case a few weeks ago, but Dowdle's growing on me as one of these handcuffs with upside.
Sig, your thoughts on Scott's Dowdle take here? You seem a little more enthusiastic about Hubbard.
I mean, it's just a really valuable role.
Yeah.
The stat I had was over the past 2 seasons, there's only been 10 running backs with over an 80% snap share. It was Rachaad White and Chuba Hubbard. There's only been 11 running backs to average 15 plus carries per game and 3 plus targets per game. And it was Rachaad White and Chuba Hubbard. You've tweeted about this a bunch, is just the Dave Canales RB1 role. We know that's a valuable role. And we know they love Chuba, the extended Chuba, but you never know. Maybe there's Dowdle. I thought played well given like a poor offensive line, poor environment, no quarterback.
Canales has this reputation in the industry about being the quarterback whisperer. I know Ryan Heath tweeted about that this week, but he's really, the last 2 years, it's been the running back ADP whisperer. Rico Dowdle, I mean, I love your take, Scott, that he's a super valuable handcuff. And Sig, he's also like a easy to click, like the range he's going in as a handcuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's a perfect pick late round or really waiver wire watch list because I don't think he's anywhere near. He's in the bottom end of backups, the injury upside backup. So I think that really what we're talking about is anybody connected with this offense. And Rico Dowdle, for whatever reason, the Cowboys were reluctant to really turn the keys over to him. And then once he did, in less than ideal circumstances, like you said, he did well. And he may have mistimed the market. You know, he should be starting for the Cowboys right now, but I think he wanted more money, and the Cowboys said no and got Javonte Williams. And then when he realized he couldn't get more money, he took what he could get from Carolina, them knowing that Jonathan Brooks wasn't going to play this year. We'll see how it goes.
One question that Scott and I have been trying to play around with the last couple of weeks, and I think we'll start asking this of every single guest until the season starts. What's something that you earnestly believe will happen, even if everybody else thinks it's kind of crazy? You've referenced this player a couple times on the pod, Sig, but your thoughts on Isaiah Likely in regards to this question?
Yeah, I just think that this is one of those situations where you can see the trends here. Okay, this is a situation where you're talking about Mark Andrews potentially on the trade market this offseason. You know, I mean, when a team is having to tell you how much they appreciate a player and how much they like a player, that's a sign, right? You have Isaiah Likely. I don't know if we're going to get the extension before the season. He's going to be extended, though. He's going to be a player that you're going to see, especially now that this Jake Ferguson deal happened. Now you have a floor for that deal that could set something in motion. The other thing I think that people underestimate about Isaiah Likely is he is a rare tight end that can play. He can play in the red zone. He can play downfield. He can play as a run after catch threat. The Ravens drafted him kind of by default. Like we all can relate to whenever you're on the clock and the player you thought for sure you were going to get was Calvin Austin. You thought for sure you were going to get him, and then the team right before you takes him, and you're like, they already took Charlie Kolar, who still could end up being a solid player at some point on another team because Isaiah Likely has been so good, and they took him coming out of Coastal Carolina, Chanticleers, as more of an offensive weapon, and he showed up and he was a great blocker. So I just think that the arrow is pointing up for him. The arrow is pointing down for Mark Andrews. It's a hyper efficient offense. I just think that if maybe it's a year early, but at tight end, the margins again are so small. He's 11th, 12th round pick. I'll take my chances.
Chanticleer's interesting. Sig, you'll appreciate this one. During football games this year, they're giving away free food. So you pay for a football ticket. You get to go walk up, get your nachos, get your hot dog, get your popcorn. They're really pumping the fan experience down there. So shout out to the Chanticleers. And Scott Barrett, I'll ask you this one. You know, you talk about coach speak and all that. What if John Harbaugh was actually telling us the truth earlier this offseason when he's like, my hope for the year is Isaiah Likely is a Pro Bowler?
Yeah, I think he said all pro, actually.
All pro. There you go. That's even loftier.
Yeah.
Even better.
The vibes are insane, and you're hearing rumors that he's going to sign a deal that's bigger than what Jake Ferguson just got. You've also heard Greg Roman say that he expects the tight end usage to be a lot like it was last year. I'm kind of out on both guys, but there's clearly tremendous contingent upside. I mean, you've seen it whenever Mark Andrews went down and Isaiah Likely stepped up as the guy. But I think there's contingent upside for both guys, but in the interim, they're sort of going to cannibalize each other. cap each other's upside. So not a target, but yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly just tremendous buzz, talented player.
Yeah, really, really an interesting one. And Sig, I'll throw out one that I put on the sheet. I'm just getting all kinds of Emeka Egbuka vibes, where could Emeka Egbuka lead Tampa Bay wide receivers in fantasy scoring? And I get absolutely destroyed by saying this one. Our own Brett Whitefield, disgusted by this take. Big Mike Evans guy. Derek Brown at me. He's really angry. That's our boy, but really annoyed that I'd even suggest him outscoring Mike Evans. It just seems
just to defend my guy Theo Gremminger here. My buddy Ari Alexander, a local TV reporter in Houston. I've done his show a few times. He just recently interviewed Mike Evans, and the clip was, "Well, Mike, you've clearly got a few years left." And Mike was like, I don't know about that. And Ari was like, what? Really? He's like, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like, I mean, I feel good, and we'll see what happens. But I feel like I've accomplished everything I set out to accomplish. I tied the record. Didn't really seem like he was good. He cared all that much about beating the record. Yeah, I don't know. It was just weird vibes from this video. So, I don't hate that take, but I really want to hear what Sig has to say.
Oh, if you're looking for the drumbeat, I mean, every single item out of Tampa about Emeka Egbuka, they're just thrilled. They're over the moon about this guy. And they're saying the right things in terms of he's ready now. He can already play multiple positions. They love what he adds. The other thing I think that people aren't potentially grappling with is Chris Godwin going to be ready for the season? Is Chris Godwin going to start the season on the PUP list? Is Chris Godwin even going to be 100% this year at any point? A second procedure? Okay, what does a second procedure mean? Was there a setback? Was there something that, a healing issue where it didn't react to the surgery the way that they wanted it to? Is also a situation where they knew this when they took Egbuka? So the other thing you have to think about here in fantasy football is, honestly, and I'm not talking about the big field contests and things like that, just your classic 12-team league, it almost would behoove you to draft as if the season was like 6 weeks long. Just draft for the first 6 weeks. And then once we're on the road, you'll adjust. And if Chris Godwin is on the PUP slope of the season, which is absolutely in play, we are projecting Emeka Egbuka for 80-90% of Chris Godwin's numbers. When Chris Godwin went down, he was wide receiver 2.
Yeah.
Period. To wide receiver 2. So Egbuka could easily be wide receiver 10 to 15. He sounds ready for it. The role's there. And an adjunct take to this, I want to throw out there that Baker Mayfield can be even better this year. Because I hear touchdown rate and things like that. I mean, we get so caught up in the weeds. Look, Baker Mayfield had 2 weeks last year where his top 3 receivers were Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, and Raheem Jarrett. Okay?
This is a great take.
Now, and look, remember the name Tez Johnson, 7th round pick. They love Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson's going to be active on game days. So now if your 5th wide receiver is Tez Johnson, Jameson McMillan's going to be better. Okay. Mm-hmm. We know this is one of the most efficient running games. Now the Tristan Wirfs thing does throw a monkey wrench in there. Charlie Heck, we'll see that could maybe mute things. But Baker Mayfield, for saying his numbers are unsustainable and they're going to regress to the mean, he was rowing upstream against some bad conditions last year. Okay? It's going to be better this year. I don't know how much better. So, yeah, Baker Mayfield. And the other thing you have to love about Baker Mayfield, again, is that idea of he's saying, I'm in an organization that embraces me and lets me do me. They're talking about, to your point, Scott, I hear a lot of talk about Super Bowl this year for them. And I know some people might think that's aspirational, but what if Mike Evans has kind of told them behind the scenes, like, this is my last ride, guys. Let's do this. Let's make it happen this year.
Yeah, and
I love this.
And Scott, he had nearly 400 rushing yards last year, Baker Mayfield, which was a huge leap forward for him. It's been like the guy who's been priced at QB7, and everyone's like, Baker Mayfield at QB7 just doesn't feel right. But to Sig's point, maybe it's a guy that the market needs to be more open-minded to. And you've talked about this, like offensive ecosystems. It's last year they had Bucky Irving. Jalen McMillan, they re-sign Chris Godwin, and then they draft Chris Godwin on top of that. It's like Tampa Bay is just putting everything in play for this offense to keep getting better under Josh Grizzard.
Yeah. So, by the way, I have to bring it up. Sig, I don't know if you remember, but you and I were talking together on Twitter in like 2021, where the coaches were like, yeah, it was a miracle Baker was even out there. This is one of the toughest guys in the sport.
Yeah.
Like, he could barely like move his shoulder, and he was still throwing 30 times per game. And then what happens? Like, no one in the NFL touches him. And we were talking about, like, why would you ever play hurt if you're like an NFL starter? Because you are never rewarded for it. You are always penalized for it. And yeah, unceremoniously discarded, has to go to the Panthers and then the Rams and then the Buccaneers. And last year was freaking awesome, man. Like, he was the most fun player to watch, period, at any position in my eyes. What he was doing, like, he was just willing the team to victories. Like, he balled out, and it was so much fun to watch. And like
he had some plays that were as good as any play Patrick Mahomes has made in his career.
Yeah, seriously. And that is such a crazy statement to make. And so I'm going to be lower on Baker because he doesn't, I mean, he, like you said, man, he ran a bit last year, but not a true Konami guy. And, you know, the touchdown rate, what we talked about with JJ, but in the back of my head, I can't stop. So like last year, I kept ranting on how underrated play callers are, where it's like, from an NFL standpoint, if you were doing an NFL draft, it would go Josh Allen 1 or Patrick Mahomes 1, the other one 2. And then at 3, it's like Kyle Shanahan, 4, Andy Reid, 5, Sean McVay. Like that's how I think important they are, and equally important from a fantasy standpoint. But this year I've kind of like, maybe it's just the inner contrarian in me, is I want to argue against it where it's like, maybe it's offensive lines that are so underrated. And maybe this is just because I'm a Trevor Lawrence hater and I'm a Kaleb Williams hater, and they both got great play callers. But yeah, like Baker, part of what, we were all like, oh, he's screwed without Dave Canales, and then he was even better. And I think it's that top 5 offensive line when everyone's healthy. I think it's going to be top 3 again this year. And I think the McShanahan guys can dance around it. Like, they're the only guys who can kind of coach around an offensive line that's not elite, or get it to a point where it looks elite or is serviceable. And so that was kind of like a take I've been flirting with. But yeah, back to like, I always want to defend a spicy take because I feel like we need more of it in this industry. Is, I had the Ari's, I talked about Ari's video, but it was also like, what's the more valuable role in this offense, the slot role or the Mike Evans role? Because through those first 7 weeks, like Sig was saying, Chris Godwin was wide receiver 2, but Mike Evans was wide receiver 21. He was below Allen Lazard. And so, maybe let's say Chris Godwin's on POP, which I think looks likely, honestly. And Emeka Egbuka, star of camp, Baker Mayfield, going in praise about how NFL ready he is. What if he's in that Chris Godwin role? He's getting schemed up. He's leading the league in screen fantasy points per game. So he has that every week floor, and then he's doing some stuff on top of it. So yeah, I just wanted to defend that take and kind of, at a bare minimum, if you're investing in this offense, you get to watch Baker Mayfield, which is a joy.
Yeah, it's definitely like Baker is super, super fun, and the Bucs are as well. Let's go with this one, Sig. Who's the grossest player that you're still a little bit excited about? I thought this was a great answer.
Yeah, Ramondre Stevenson. And it's great. The off-season quote, like, oh, I know the Josh McDaniels offense. You better believe that because of how much he yelled at me the first time around. Is that a positive? I guess it is. And I think one of the things that we have to factor in here, and a lot of Tennessee fans, I think, are going to nod when I say Mike Vrabel's just really conservative with rookies. And after what's happened with Philadelphia, I mean, shouldn't maybe now there are always exceptions. Again, when these rookies show up like Emeka Egbuka and they show they're ready, then they're ready. But otherwise, teams are going to ease rookies in, and that's what we're seeing, is that Travion Henderson, although he's getting a ton of work moving around the formation as a receiver, I think you're going to see him on some outside runs and things like that. He's the third string running back. And Antonio Gibson's still pretty good, played well at the end of the year last year. Now, Ramondre Stevenson has to limit fumbling, But Ramondre Stevenson is a 3-down back. Ramondre Stevenson is a back that not too long ago we were taking in the 4th round. And they also extended him last year. Now, it wasn't like Chuba Hubbard where they extended him and he showed why they extended him. Again, by the end of the year, it seemed like they were losing trust in him. But it's a new regime, and I think you're going to see him in an improved offensive line, quarterback arrow pointing up, Stephon Diggs. Don't even get me started on Demario Douglas, who I think is a player that it's staring us right in the face. Demario Douglas catches 80, 90 balls this year. Like, I almost think that should be a median projection for him at this point based on everything that we're hearing. So I think you're going to see a vastly improved offense, rising tide, raising all ships. And Ramondre Stevenson can be a player that can be like Brian Robinson. Maybe not quite the boost from an offensive environment that Brian Robinson got last year, but unlike Brian Robinson, I think he has more to offer in terms of juice. I think he has more to offer as a receiver, and I think that he's a player that hopefully will stay healthier than Brian Robinson did last year.
Yeah, interesting take. And Stevenson's going in a range of drafts right now where I don't think he can possibly hurt you. And like you said, Sig, if it's one where Henderson fails to deliver, then Stevenson can end up being a really, really nice pick. Scott, we talk about thinking outside the box, zigging while others zag. Sig's sort of the perfect guest for this sort of take. Who's a player that you think the fantasy hive mind might be too low on that could end up having an awesome season, or potentially a player that the hive mind can't even fathom having a really, really strong season?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna keep this close to the vest. I decided.
Okay.
I have a few gross ones. If you guys want to guess on who it is, you could watch the Sean Siegel episode. I did just want to echo what Sig said. I think that's a good one. I asked Danny Heifetz the same question, and he said Ramondre. He was like, Ramondre just feels like the sort of guy where you're in a draft with Sean Siegel. Siegel takes him, and you're just like, oh no, and then you move Ramondre like 2 tiers up in your rankings. Who is yours, Theo?
This one I kind of we'll save this one for next episode. I got to get to Sig on a couple of these. I didn't have one really for this one. I do think we'll talk about him on next episode as well. I think Deebo Samuel having a really big season in the range of outcomes. Might as well get Sig's opinion on that one. Scott and I will talk about that with Rich Rebar next week when we have our wide receiver specific episode. But Sig, your vibes on Deebo, Scott and I have talked a lot about him, sort of in the background, not necessarily while recording. I'm into it this year. Everything seems like the vibes in Washington, the beat reporters, the team, the coaching staff, everybody's all in on Deebo. And we haven't even heard at all about his usage as a runner in this offense.
Yes.
At all.
Thank you.
Thank
you. So, I mean, look, at the exact same point in the draft, I'm probably looking for Jacoby Myers, but I'm not going to talk anybody out of Deebo Samuel, like late 7th round wide receiver pick. Here's some things in Deebo's favor, okay? If you want a reason why he fell off a cliff last year, he got pneumonia. Now, it's possible the pneumonia may have permanently reduced his oxygen absorption capacity or something like that. And he just isn't going to be the player he was before the pneumonia. But he was pretty much himself before the guy we expected before the pneumonia. And after he wasn't, he was a 3rd, 4th round pick. Now he's a 7th round pick. So it's already priced in that he's not going to be himself. But here's you mentioned the running back thing. And I thought it was really fascinating. Now, Ja'Cory Cross-Guimaraes is a guy that should be on everybody's late round target list. Again, drumbeat. And if you say it's not going to be Brian Robinson, Corey Cross-Guimaraes is a really interesting guy, but what if Deebo Samuel is also part of that solution? That they want more juice in their backfield. They didn't make a big move. Maybe if Deebo Samuel was part of the big move, the move that we didn't see happen, so he could get back to that dual threat role. Cliff Kingsbury, the thing about Deebo is he's not a true wide receiver. You can't really plug him into typical right out of the box wide receiver roles in most offenses. So I really was worried about him on a team after San Francisco. But if there's one offensive coordinator that will let him just run bubble screens and do that Deebo Samuel, it's Cliff Kingsbury. We know that Jaden Daniels is hyper accurate on short passes to set up run after catch opportunities. And then now there's a potential gasoline on the fire thing with Terry McLaurin. Now, I mean, most of the time it's right to bet against the holdout or hold in, but it sounds like the numbers are very far apart on these two. And I just don't, I say, 1%, 2%, 3%. I mean, how differently are we going to look at Deebo Samuel if Terry McLaurin isn't there week 1? So all those things tell me, yeah, I get it.
Scott, quick, you got to give people a quick Deebo take in 1 minute or less, and we can expand on it next week.
Yeah, I'm just in full agreement. As a fun experiment, I looked at what Rondale Moore did in, 2022 with Cliff Kingsbury. And if you just take those targets and you multiply it by his ADOT, and you multiply that by what would have been the worst yards after catch per reception season of Deebo's career, you would have got a player who ranked top 6 in receiving yards per game. So it's like a valuable role. It's like the only place Deebo could have went where it's like, you're actually excited about how he would be used. And like Deebo was kind of fat last year in the second half. He was fat, 2 years before that in the holdout, but the year before that and the year after in the middle, like he was, one of the most valuable fantasy assets you could have by all accounts. He looks great. Team's very high on him. McLaurin holding out, 30 years old, also wasn't a target earner at all. I really like this take. I'm with you guys on Deebo.
Yeah, and the quarterback in Washington's pretty good as well, guys. No questions there. I think this is going to be...
That's our MVP winner, right?
That's our MVP. Scott and I have been on this train. I've seen a lot of people on X right now doing the Jaden Daniels MVP. School of Scott's been saying that for about 9 months now, so we like Jaden Daniels a lot. Sig, let's say you're in a regular PPR league. Let's say you do one draft a year. Jamar Chase goes off the board at the 101. Who's the number 2 pick?
In a PPR league, it's probably going to be CD Lamb. There you go. And I think it's CD Lamb because, again, as we talked about, I feel comfortable with the running backs that are going to be there at the 2-3 turn to get me my number 1 running back, who is not that far off of the running backs I'm passing on compared to the wide receivers that are going to be there, with the exception of Garrett Wilson, who I'll probably take anyway. But we saw CD Lamb 2 years ago put up Jamar Chase kind of numbers as far as targets, points per game in a PPR league. I don't see any reason he's not going to do that again this year.
And I have said Bijan Robinson is my number 2 pick. I have him 2 behind Chase. Love CeeDee Lamb. We do our brain trust articles over here at Fantasy Points, and we have a this year's version of 2025 CeeDee Lamb is this year's version of 2023 CeeDee Lamb was my take there. You're going to have to read Scott's article to find out his answer for this one. That's going to be dropping on Fantasy Points soon. Sig, let's keep this going. We talked about one offense that you think could produce multiple ADP winners. What's one offense that you think drafters should be avoiding based on some bad vibes?
Yeah, and again, this is one of my trademarks. I'm a neurotic Pittsburgh Steelers fan, Western Pennsylvania born and bred, but Aaron Rodgers in a Arthur Smith offense, they trade for, your big move is trading for DK Metcalf and then Jonnu Smith. Another thing that, these are just peripheral things, but I hear they continue to try to force Roman Wilson as an outside receiver, and it's not quite working. Did they watch him at Michigan? Did they even understand? I mean, this is so here, guys. Here's your galaxy brain take. This is the year that the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver narrative flips. It was, if they move on from receiver, run. George Pickens is going to have a career year. If they draft a wide receiver, get in on him. They're wasting Roman Wilson. It's going to be Roman Wilson's going to be Quentin Johnston before Jim Harbaugh. And, that's just where I think this team is. And Kaleb Johnson might be a good player, and Jalen Moore might be a good player. Also, they have 2 young tackles, completely unproven tackles. Everything we've seen with Aaron Rodgers, he throws teams into chaos now. So, Paul Skeens is pretty good, and the Penguins will be good in like 8 years. I don't know.
Yeah, and when Sig's saying like the narrative's going to flip, you've been on this train for years where Deontay Johnson, Martavis Bryant, Antonio Brown, like you had this take for years and years correctly, where Sig has said this wide receiver gets like, leaves Pittsburgh, Chase Claypool, and then the quality of fantasy play shoots way down. You've been on a really good streak there. So for you to say George Pickens, this sort of enthusiasm, that should be a big takeaway for all of our School of Scott listeners. Scott, at least, come on, pick a running back. Give me somebody in the Pittsburgh offense you want to draft. Come on, it's Kaleb Johnson. somebody. Give me somebody.
Oh, yeah. Kaleb Johnson is a great pick, particularly in best ball. I'm not sure why he's going as late as he is. Like, just listen to how the coaches talk about him. They talk about him like he's Najee Harris in the May, or like the month after they initially drafted him, or like a young Le'Veon Bell. Like, they're saying this is a workhorse back. It seems to me like they're going to give him more carries than Najee had last year, and we should expect better efficiency. So, really good value. Everyone wants to draft these, rookies, these unknown talents with upside. But no one wants to draft him for some reason.
Yeah, this will be an offense we'll talk about for the next few weeks. I have a loaded August here on School of Scott. But Sig, before we get you out of here, every guest is giving a bold take or for the season. You've dropped some hot ones this show, so what are you saving for the end here?
Tucker Kraft, we're going to think of him in the same vein as George Kittle.
Let's go.
Oh, I love this.
King.
Yeah, we're going to think of him in the same vein. And look, he doesn't need that much of a jump forward. Okay, first of all, you have the team saying, repeatedly saying, we need to feature Tucker Kraft. Mm-hmm. How often do you hear a team say that about a tight end? Okay, that's number one. Number two, just watch him play. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in fantasy football, it's just as simple as a guy that makes you stand up out of your seat. A guy that's just like, oh my gosh, every time he gets the ball, I get excited. Now, he only had 70-some targets last year. If you get him, how many targets did George Kittle have last year?
95-ish.
Right? You get Tucker Kraft to 95. Maybe he's not George Kittle, but he's like the next ranked tight end after George Kittle. Okay. Tucker Kraft tore a pec last season, the offseason, weightlifting, right? So I thought, we'll see what Luke Musgrave can do. And he came out and did what he did last year, coming off of an offseason injury. Now he's coming off, he is fired up. This is another one that's don't say you weren't warned. Okay. And then, of course, observers in Packard land saying, yeah, Tucker Kraft. He's going to be the signature player. And Matthew Golden can make things even easier for him. And then imagine the second half of the year when Matthew Golden and Christian Watson might be on the field at the same time. All right? Tucker Kraft, man. Get to know the name. They know Kraft might not make the best cheese, but he's going to be making the cheese heads happy.
Absolute bars from Sigmund Bloom there. And Scott, maybe the answer to which Packers wide receiver to draft should just be Tucker Kraft. Sig, we've talked about this. It's a low bar to lead the team in targets in Green Bay. And if a tight end does it, it's massive. So I don't know. Scott, vibes on Tucker Kraft.
Yeah. So I love this take. This is a great take. Haven't heard it anywhere else. Here's a stat I had on Tucker Kraft. The only tight ends to average over 10 yards per target on at least 70 targets in a single season since 2014. George Kittle 3 times, Rob Gronkowski once, Dallas Goedert once, and now Tucker Kraft, who did it last year. If this was a wide receiver or this was a tight end and maybe any other offense, we would typically say these sort of insane hyper efficiency seasons almost always lend itself. It's unsustainable, the efficiency, unless you're Kittle, but typically lend itself towards more volume in the following season. And so what have we heard this offseason? We've heard Adam Stanovich say, yeah, it's really a focal point for us to get Tucker Kraft more involved in the passing game. You've heard Matt LaFleur say the exact same thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay. They just drafted a rookie wide receiver round 1. They're saying Jaden Reed needs to be more involved as well, blah, blah, blah. But what have you heard from the beat writers out of camp? You've heard, hey, it seems like they're making a real effort to get the ball to Tucker Kraft early and often. You heard 3 different beat reporters say the same thing. So maybe that is what happens. And so Tucker Kraft is a guy I'm higher on versus ADP because, I don't trust LaFleur. I don't trust this offense that spreads the ball around. It's a different guy every week. But I do like the talent and I do see the upside.
Yeah, go ahead and draft yourself some Tucker Kraft, draft yourself some Isaiah Likely. Make sure you're tuning in for everything that Sig Bloom drops on his podcast. Make sure you're checking out his article over at Football Guys. Make sure you're checking out everything we're dropping at Fantasy Points. We got a ton of articles planned for August. Scott's got his big article planned. And then our podcast. The audience has been fantastic this summer. Jared Smola is joining me on Dynasty Life this week. Jim Coventry is joining me on Fantasy Football Daily. And stick with us here at School of Scott. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.